times before, but and I've always loved it, but actually I really got a great deal more out of it today. And I mean, I'm sort of an imposter here really, because I don't have any expertise to lend to this subject, except I thought for my own area it was spectacularly wonderfully acted, and because I suppose if it's about anything, it's about the immense difficulties involved in communication, whether that is sexual or verbal or whatever form it's taking, and yet in this film, which seems to be supremely about tips of icebergs, I mean, the dialogue, wonderful though it is only the tip, but you're constantly aware of these icebergs, which should be what most dramas are about, but very rarely is, and this sort of incredible depth of exploration which you must have gone through with these wonderful actors, all four of the main principal actors, I thought were just phenomenal, and they so profoundly knew who they were, and they so profoundly knew who each other was and what those connections were and were not between each other, in a way that I felt sort of envious of, because this film was made, must have been made at the end as a culmination of a rehearsal process which is lost to us now, completely gone, and the process of rehearsing a film is something which would now be considered to be sort of anachronistic, which is very sad, because this is what film can do when it is allowed that sort of time and space and respect, and when it's seen as the culmination of a process rather than an end in itself. But anyway, it was very beautiful, I thought, and the way in which the documentary footage is connected to the contemporary footage, and the exploration of visual interiors and exteriors in relation to the interiors and exteriors of the people whose lives and souls are being examined was just wonderful. So very, very proud.
Well, I too thought, was very moved by it today, and I found it, I've seen it 3 or 4 times now, and this was the most powerful. Partly it was as you just said, Hugh, it was a good showing. I mean, you could see and hear well, and it's nice to have it on a big screen as opposed to on a laptop. But also possibly because of an audience that was listening so closely and so attentive as well, it seemed to heighten the experience. And I thought that each time I saw it, it's actually become in one way, more puzzling to me. You know, that it's about, you know, what is psychoanalysis, what is a cure, what role does memory play, how useful is memory. You know, there's different views expressed about that, and what the relationship was like with Freud, what above all perhaps the relationship was like between the two characters in the present of the film, and what that meant. But I thought that whatever one has to say about memory, about cure, about all these issues about sexuality, about the hints of theories and ideas that are offered in, you know, I don't think one's given an answer, it's left very open. But the thing that was most powerful was that experience of intimacy and intensity. And I think it's partly the filmmaking, but it's partly also the story you're telling. It is of people who could understand each other, I think, or at least understand at a certain level and be close to each other. And there is that sort of just that elusive hint at the end that maybe he had found a woman and she had found a man. I mean, I know that's a bit simple, but there's just that moment of the embrace after all that we've been through with them that I think is quite moving. So, I don't know, I'll ask you a question, you asked you a question, and that is about the music. Because I was also very struck by the music, which seemed to me to be just right, and has a sort of uncanniness to it, which is part of what a change in memory means, that you see something that was once familiar, that you see it afresh and new and in a frightening way. And I thought the music attached, especially at the beginning, to the relics in Freud's room, was very evocative and conveyed from the start this very good impression. And I wondered how you came about it.
I'm very happy to talk about the music, but when I've done that, I'd like to come back to this issue of performance and intimacy, and the nature of the rehearsal process. The music was a very great difficulty And we first cut the film without any music. We didn't know what music we were going to use. And then it was a very long edit. About 2 weeks into the edit, Brian Gascoigne, who was a composer, asked me if he could be considered as the composer for the music for this film. And I knew him anyway through other routes. So I met with Brian and talked to him about the film, and then we showed him a cut of it. And he said he would really like to have a go at composing. I was quite sceptical about this. I thought it probably wouldn't work. And meanwhile, I was looking for piano music. And when we came to our first sort of good cut, first cut more or less to length, we laid in a lot of piano music that I had chosen. And it was okay, but somehow awful. And all the time you thought, oh, well, here's this bloody piano. I'll start up again. And in the end, the only bit of piano that survives is the revel at the end. So I went to Brian, we screened it to him without any music at all, and asked him to come up with musical ideas, not necessarily to compose a piece, but to find music that would work. So Brian went away and came back with, I think, 3 different possibilities, 3 different kinds of music, and he played each one of them to us. One was a Beethoven, music from Beethoven. Another was a mixture of different classical pieces, and the third was by a Japanese composer whose name I've now forgotten. And I listened to it, and I loved the Japanese music. I said, well, this composer's what we want. And Brian said, are you absolutely sure? And I said, yes, that is what we want, because it had these syncopated little pieces of fractured music. There'd be a sudden line of theme, and then it would be broken again. I could see that we could use that. And so I said to Brian, we want this Japanese composer. He said, well, actually, the Japanese composer is me. I didn't want to distort things by saying it was me. He said, I composed that. And so I said, well, it's perfect. So he then created a number of tracks. He composed a number of tracks. It's absolutely in the spirit of this Japanese music. And we started laying it. Now, as we laid it, we found, in fact, that we could play with it in a very remarkable way. Because it was so fractured, we started moving it around in pieces. So we started laying bits of this music, just like a sound effect, really. Sometimes little threads of it, sometimes individual sounds. You can see we pulled out a sound and we just dropped it in, and then 2 other sequences of sounds. And Brian helped us do this, but it became a sort of a very, very fascinating project to build in this music, because Brian had caught something with this music that was just right. It was simply brilliant of him. And then he very wonderfully allowed us to break up his composition and play with it. And then the revel at the end seemed to be right for the last stretch of the film. A sort of return to a sad, mournful, mellifluous musical form. Though, in fact, we worked very hard on the performance of that. The pianist, we wanted the pianist to play it in a particular way. There's one particular note, it's an E, I think, that he keeps hitting me. We got him to play it with extra emphasis on this one note, to make it additionally sort of mournful and poignant, and in some ways to evoke the Japanese music as well. So we did a little bit of tampering with that, but otherwise it was revel. On this question of time and rehearsal, we had a 3-week rehearsal period for this, which, as Juliet was saying, would be unheard of now. We had 3 weeks, not only we had 3 weeks, we had 3 weeks with these absolutely stunningly brilliant actors who immersed themselves in this script in a really remarkable way. They engaged with what it meant, with the puzzles. A lot of the rehearsal time was spent puzzling over the puzzles, trying to decide which of these questions the film was attempting to answer, which it was determinedly leaving open. There was lots of exploration of intellectual background. There was a huge amount of work, especially from Maria Schell, on who she really was. She wanted to know everything about herself, so she would give me like essay projects. At the end of the day, she'd say, I need to know about my husband. So you have to write an essay about my husband. The next day I come in with my homework done, and I give her the husband that I'd imagined. And then she wanted to know why she hadn't had children. She wanted to know every possible background story that she could get in place. Now, that was her determination, and we had the time to do it. Scofield, in fact, was he was much less interested in intellectualizing and finding background to it, and much more preoccupied with exactly how to play every line of it and every scene. He wanted to work on it down to the closest detail. Always asking why, but really wanting to know in rehearsal what the answer to the why question was. Whereas Maria would want to know why, but in rehearsal she actually often refuse to play things. So when it came to actually running a scene in rehearsal, Maria would often subvert the running of the scene by saying, oh no, this is like children playing trains, we're just children playing trains, going round and round, let's not do this, let's wait till we're shooting it. And Paul Scofield found this very frustrating. In fact, quite a tension grew between them in the course of rehearsal, which was troubling but also incredibly creative, because they found a sort of loving antagonism of very different kinds of people, and they allowed their difference as actors to play into their difference as characters, as they made these characters in the rehearsal period. And the younger actors, to give an idea of how committed they were, spent lots of time with tape recordings of their older selves. Especially Clare Higgins told me that she got Maria Schell to make a tape recording of herself speaking in English, stretches of the script, and then she'd have this tape on as much as she could when she was not at rehearsals. So that Maria's rhythms, her way of using language went deeply into herself, so that she could be the young Maria on camera. It was very profound thing to do something together, but they actually really didn't agree about how to do it, about the process and about what it is to be an actor even. So the way in which they were working on the part and the way in which they were emerging as actors were feeding each other in the most fascinating and creative way. And the culminating example of the problem and the strength that this generated for us was when it came to the kiss at the end. In the script that we had, they embrace but don't kiss, and they're going to kiss and then they don't. They hug, and that was in the script. And Maria, when we were in Vienna, that was all shot in Vienna, we shot it, but that was actually the last day of filming. Maria said, "You got it wrong. They should kiss." And I said, "I don't think so." She said, "No, you got it wrong. They should kiss. There's something more going on here that you don't understand." And so I took Paul aside and I said, Maria's very keen that we do the kiss. Absolutely not. A complete mistake. The script is just right. So I went back to Maria and said, well, Paul wasn't very keen on this. And she said, "You're the director, you've got to have us kiss. One take with a kiss, and then you can decide." So we did 2 or 3 takes as scripted, and then we did 1 take with the kiss as Maria scripted it, really. And of course, she was right. Yes. And Paul agreed after that was right. It was an amazing process in relation to both acting and the actor's relationship to the script, but it all depended on having a lot of time.
It's fascinating that, because actually I think you can tell that when you're watching it, can't you? I mean, you can see that they're very different kinds of actor, and you can actually also see that, I think you can see that Maria Schell is very, very, very focused on what Scofield's doing all the time and what his character is doing, and absorbing it and interpreting it silently or not, but largely silently. Whereas I don't think you do get the sense that Alexander is so focused on her. Somehow he is, as his flat is this strange sort of museum, this sort of archive of his failed or his lost life in a way, and this strange museum he seems to live in, and the curtains being drawn at the end, closing him in again. And you have a sense that the character's a bit like that too, is that he doesn't make the journey towards her in the same way that she does towards him. But it's fascinating this, because I always think when you're acting that there are 2 kinds of actor really, and the kind of actor you're working with, it'll profoundly affect the way you work together. So there are actors who become actors because they want to reveal who they are, and there are actors who become actors because they want to conceal who they are and be somebody else. And I think that Maria Schell is the former, and to some extent I think Scofield is the latter. And although people think that he's, I mean, he's a great acting hero of mine, but I think that actually there's a lot he doesn't let us into, whereas she seems to want to make everything available, and it works so brilliantly for those two characters, I think, in the film. But it's not surprising, therefore, that there was some tension in rehearsal, because that often is the case.
You know, I can see that. I couldn't see it all, but I mean, I can see what you're saying, and certainly he was his orientation was to keep things shut, wasn't it, and closed in. Even when she rings the bell, and the first thing he does is shut the door. And he says everything has remained the same, and he hasn't left for 40 years. But on the other hand, one feels things do change as he goes through, you know, with the passion, the feeling, and the intensity. And although I think you're right, he doesn't listen as closely in one way, but his associative references were also quite. They often brought up something that was similar to her character, and he was kind to her when she cried. He gave her he took her cigarette away, and he touched her hair, and then she said, "No, don't do that," and then he gave her the handkerchief. And I thought there was a kindliness in him, which was some sort of understanding.
Oh, yes. Yes, no, I didn't mean he didn't have any understanding, but I think it was... I mean, I like the fact about the film that the two characters don't go on the same kind of journey. Their journeys are not parallel completely. You know, for the start, she has made the journey in the first place. She's come from New York to Vienna, and that tells us a lot. You know, she's initiated it, and then she's literally done the journey towards him, and then, you know, it's a question of whether he's going to join her in this journey or not thereafter. But the fact that they have a different relationship to journeying at all is what's so interesting about the film, I think.
The difference in the degree to which they're able to disclose themselves was built into the script. And he is, in our understanding, with the author's understanding, which was not different from the actor's understanding, but with the author's understanding, was that she was much more able to make relationships, was much more able to have a life in the present. She's a modern person, whereas he is not really able to make relationships and seems not to be able to have a life in the present. He's a sort of trapped person, and therefore we replay that last bit of the young Alexander on the couch, reprising what he said before, to create this sense that this never ends. This never ends. He's always going to be running the same memories, and deep memories as they may be, if he is trapped in the running of them. But there is a lot in the script that makes for that differentiation. And there's live action, so we had scene exterior, Russian steppe, hunt, 4 horses, or grand banquet in Tsarist Russia. We had all these scenes written thinking we would raise enough money to shoot all these scenes for real. And the BFI, although they agreed to make the film, they come up with a budget that couldn't possibly cope with that. And I remember the definitive meeting sitting in the office of the executive producer Peter Sainsbury when he said to me, "You know, you can't do this. I mean, we're going to do it, but you can't do this. You can't have all these scenes. You've got to think of a way of paring this down without it making you look as though you've done it, you know, with one horse and one Tsarist official." In the meeting, I said, "Well, you know, we had thought about archive. Archive would flash through our heads early on in the." And Peter said, "That sounds like a great idea. Why don't you think about using some archive and some live action?" So we started rewriting the public history, all the history. We started turning into archive, and we did that by hunting the archive. So we spent a lot of time. I particularly spent a lot of time going through archival collections in London and Paris and Munich, and trying to find what footage there was that might resonate with this story we'd already written. And as we found the archive, Michael Ignatieff and I both got more and more excited about what the archive could do by way of producing public history, but then not in an obvious, we were not quite sure who knows what in this, even when it comes to public history. And also the archive, to some extent, reshaped the script, because we found bits of archive that invited linking pieces and rethinking about some of the storytelling. So the public history went through quite an evolution. In fact, in a way, it went from being very simple costume drama public history to being quite internal public history, but it remains that.
Can I just is really very evocative of the internal process of free associations and of the conscious and unconscious coming in, because the way you use the footage and the historical events is really beautifully woven together. I mean, the integration between the two is really fantastic. I wonder whether I could pass on now the microphone to the audience. So we have about 20-25 minutes for...
Today, I've not thought before quite so clearly that there's something in history that's about to happen, although it happened in the past. The Russian Revolution or the Civil War, or the coming of Hitler to Vienna, are things about to happen in the story of these people's lives as they remember them. And there's a way in which, as you think about the traumatic or the powerful or the formative events in your own life, they have that kind of reconstructed present immanence. And I think that is in the way the public archive is used. So there's another part of that. Thank you very much. I had a long and very good friendship, and we talked about collaborating on project or other. We've been talking about it for years. And in 1982 we came with the idea of a 4-part TV series called The Science of Desire. It was a great idea. And what we should do is make 4 documentaries for television about men who constituted themselves experts on women, and, especially on female sexuality. And we came up with the 4 candidates, and Freud was one of the candidates. And one was Desire, one was a man called Mumby, who wrote social history in the end of the 19th century and did a phenomenally interesting and detailed study of his servant, his woman's servant. And now there was Isaac Baker Brown, the man who in the 1870s advocated clitoridectomy as a cure for female depression. So those were the 4 subjects. And we started working on them. I roughed out 2 of them, and Michael roughed out 2. And then as we talked about the Freud one, Michael said, I think the best way to do the Freud is to take this one case, the case of female homosexuality from 1919. It's a not well-known case, and it's full of full of enigma, the right kind of dramatic enigma, because you can tell from the way Freud writes his account of the case that it went badly wrong, that the woman resisted him very strongly, and in the end he says, I can't go on with this, you should get a woman analyst. Those ideas are in this short, many of you probably know this case much better than I do, it's a short, a very, very suggestive case. So we decided to take this case and make that the Freud episode. So we started dramatizing that sequence of events in the consulting room that led to Freud saying, this doesn't work. And imagining all that was not written in there. So imagining who this girl was, where she came from, why she resisted him, what Freud really was saying, what construction he was putting on the account she was giving of her life. And we tried to build this picture of this case as a little drama. And the more we worked on it, the more kind of thrilling it became as a creative experience. It seemed to leap into life, this idea of having Freud and this girl. And the more we worked on it, the less interested we were in the other 3. And the less interested we were in documentary, and the more interested we were in the kind of fiction. So we wrote a screenplay which was just this case. And it was pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting, but it wasn't enough. And we realised that we needed to find another dimension. So about that time, we'd heard about Karen Obholtzer, the Viennese or Austrian journalist who had discovered the Wolfman still alive in a flat in Vienna. She wrote a book describing the discovery of him and his bitterness towards Freud. So Karen Obholtzer's book then became another source of inspiration, really, and we started to weave a version of the Wolfman into the female homosexuality case history. And that, as soon as we started to work on that, we knew we got what we wanted, and it then sort of flew from there. The original idea was to find a Viennese apartment in Vienna. So we looked in Vienna, but then Production people said it'd be too expensive and complicated doing Vienna. We better find an apartment in London. So we hunted for apartments in London, and we couldn't find one. And then our designer, Caroline Ames, said, "You know, you'll never find the apartment. You've got to build it." So she said, "I want to build it." So we found a space in the Greenwich Arts School, a huge empty warehouse, and Caroline took it upon herself to build a Viennese apartment in Greenwich. And she went to Vienna to buy all the fittings, even the switches, the paintings, everything, apart from big items she brought from Vienna, and created this Viennese apartment in Greenwich, which is a wonderful job.
People in this room could answer that question better than me, but I suppose the question is also what was to be cracked. I mean, it comes up as a question in the film several times. Is she there because she tried to kill herself, as Freud says? Was she there, which is what her parents wanted, which was she should be cured of her homosexuality? And Freud, but he does talk about cure, and he does talk about, he does try to explain or help her to start to think about, at any rate, what might be going on in her attraction towards Anna, Anna's attraction for her. And I thought he followed, I thought there was an idea that was sort of then seemed to disappear, which was the idea that she was in a masculine position, she was identified with her father, and that's how she got close to her father, and that the woman was in a way herself, so that she created a situation in which, that's how, or her mother, but she created a situation in which the loving relationship that she wanted with her father was in place, but in a reversed way, as it were. But that's only a suggestion. But I thought that the thing that came through was she really listening to him? You know, did she really want to be there? Was she really open to the ideas? And I thought, you know, her parents sent her there. She was 19 years old. She was in love, or she had been. I think she probably was still in love when. I mean, it wasn't after the separation when the analysis took place. So it was a very short time, a few months rather than years at all. You know, very short. So I thought there was a lot to be said about her. And he says, I tell you things, and you think, you tell me how ingenious, how interesting, he says, as if they're not really about you. And I thought that was kind of, you know, there's a question, what could anybody do in terms of really getting through to someone if they treat things as not really about themselves? And we all do that as patients, we all do that to greater or lesser extents. I mean, we all push things away, we don't want to know, we think it's a bit too clever by half, we think, you know, what's going on, why is he on about this again and again, you know, so all sorts of resistance happens and is part of the weave of the analytic process. But I thought that was quite a lot of suggestion about her being seriously resistant to what was going on. So I don't know why Freud thought, maybe he thought her overt hostility to her father was not helpful in relation to himself. But I don't know the answer to the question. Do you?
I don't know, but I think it's clear from the case. Well, my difficulty is I no longer remember what's the case and what's our concoction. The film is our concoction. I think I do remember from the case that she very much did not want to be there. It was parents who had insisted that she be there, and I imagine that would be a fatal flaw in our relationship. About the case of Freud, and inevitably we got into the argument about psychoanalysis very early on in the writing. And intriguingly, as we wrote, Michael Ignatieff tended to take the Freudian, or take Freud's side, as it were, in the argument. I tended to take the side of Sophie, as we came to call her. So there was an argument between us, the authors, about psychoanalysis that was informing what we were doing. So there is a way in which this is at the heart of this film, or perhaps the genesis of the film lies in psychoanalytic kinds of questions of a rather simple minded kind. But quite soon we became interested in a larger question, which is memory. But it's not only an interest in memory, it's an interest in the kind of question you ask yourself as you get older about, am I messed up because of what happened to me when I was a baby and what my parents did to me and what happened with my siblings? Or am I messed up because of what happened in the course of the 20th century? Now, Michael Ignatieff comes from a privileged Russian family. They were dispossessed by the revolution. I come from a Jewish refugee family who were dispossessed by the Nazis. So meditations on what history has done to you were very much at the heart of who we were as people and as thinkers. And I think that question, what lies behind the complications that are ourselves, is not necessarily a question about psychoanalysis, but it's a question that's inseparable from psychoanalytic questions, and is necessarily a question about memory and history. That may be a slightly convoluted answer.
Link between Michael Ignatieff as the Russian aristocrat, as it were, and you as the Jewish refugee, and the two people being the origins of the two people in the film. And I thought that was a very interesting thing that came out. That I wondered maybe that deepened your making of the film as well. I also wanted to ask you one other question, which is a bit irrelevant to what's just gone on, which is, why did you not make more feature films?
Well, it wasn't for want of trying. I wrote 3 more subsequently, one of which got to the point of casting, and then the production company that was funding it went broke, and I was left carrying the debts of it. And then another one, the film I was making was John Berger. I was working with John Berger on a screenplay we did together, and we had that pulled away from us by American executive producers. There's a great difficulty in making a career as a director of drama, which lies in having to be convinced there is nothing in the world more important than your project. And a weakness of mine, I think, is being able to hold on to a belief that any one project of mine is more important than other things in life. I think there were other things in life that came along that were also compelling and interesting, and drew on other parts of myself. After a series of losses and failures and setbacks, I thought, well, this is not my destiny, obviously. But I regret it.